Hi everyone, my name is Keith Brooks and this is Brooks Channel, and for today's video I'm going to be reading the 10th chapter to the first draft of my Outcasts novel. Now this will be the start of the book's final quarter, and it will introduce the 6th and final of the main protagonists. Last time we finished chapter 9, which was the end of the 5th main protagonist, Beth's story. Hers took place about 2 weeks after the first 4 of the main characters ended up leaving home to start their adventures. And this one will take place about a month before that. Yeah. So, without further ado, let's open up the book and get started. Alright. Chapter 10. Going back further in time to around a month before Joey, Mitch, Jay, and Woody left our home, and a bit over 2 weeks before Beth left the academy, we meet the 6th and final outcast. Born with exceptional superhuman abilities, which he honed at a young age. Very few of his peers could match him one-on-one. After a series of events that led to a great misunderstanding, the young boy set out to prove himself worthy of his people's greatest treasure. This is the beginning to the adventures of Darren. Our story begins in the town of Ravens Point, a small community on the far side of the western region. The town's population sat at just a bit over 500 at the time, around half of which were in their middle ages. This town has a long history dating back to before the regions were established. This is also where our final outcast was born and raised. Alright, around the western end of the town lies Ravens Point High School. Here, just like any other school, where the town's kids in their mid to late teen years go to learn. Out in the schoolyard after class, a large group of students were gathered around. They all had their eyes glued on 2 boys in the center of a dirt ring. Both of them were trying to wrestle the other to the ground. And in a community of superhumans, it's not uncommon for physical games and challenges to be held frequently. Whether it's a ball game, a race, or a fight, almost every youth in town takes it as a chance to prove themselves. This was no exception. One of the boys was thrown to the ground with a loud thud. Looking up while groaning, he saw his opponent staring back at him. This boy stood at 6.5 feet at just the age of 15 years old. He had short, messy black hair and dark brown eyes that felt like they could pierce your soul. He had an impressive amount of muscle all over his body, both from his natural strength and from years of training. He was dressed simply in a white tank top, black sweatpants, and black sneakers, with a little dirt on them from the fight. This boy was named Darren Stone. Darren stood across from the other boy, waiting to see if he'd get up and continue their match. After a moment, the boy glared at Darren and quickly got back up. He charged at Darren with his arms out while screaming loudly. He then tackled Darren and wrapped his arms around his waist to try and lift him up. Darren was moved 2 inches at best from the tackle and was too heavy for his opponent to lift up. After a brief moment, Darren raised his arm up and slammed his elbow into the other boy's back. He screamed out in pain as his grip on Darren's waist loosened. Darren then grabbed his opponent and proceeded to violently suplex him to the ground. The boy lied on the ground, gasping for breath, as Darren started to pin him. Another boy, acting as ref, rushed over to start the count. 1, 2, 3, the ref shouted, while tapping his hand down each time. Darren wins! The students watching the match cheered loudly as Darren stood up, the ref grabbing his arm to raise it up. That was awesome, one student said. He was stupid trying to fight Darren, another said. It was still cool to watch, another replied. Darren turned to his opponent, who was still on the ground. He held his arm out to help him up. Good match. Darren said to him. The other boy looked up at him and grabbed his hand. Yeah, he said after getting back on his feet. Hey Darren, one of his classmates called out while running towards him. Our homeroom teacher wants to talk to you. Darren looked at him with a frown, already knowing what it was for. I'm coming, Darren said with a sigh before walking inside the school. A few minutes later, Darren was in his homeroom class, sitting at his teacher's desk. The teacher sat on the opposite end while taking out a handful of papers. He looked at Darren with a stern face before putting them face down. Darren just sat silently, waiting for him to speak. Do you know why I called you here, Darren? The teacher asked him. I think so, sir, Darren answered. His teacher flipped one of the papers face up to show him. This is your last math quiz, the teacher said, pointing at the grade. It was just enough for a D-. He then showed Darren's last English, history, and science papers. All of them were a similar grade. Darren just looked at them in silence for a moment. This is the 5th round of failing grades in a row, the teacher said to Darren. Are you even remotely paying attention in class? I am, sir, Darren answered. I just couldn't remember most of it. An honest answer, but one he used many times. That excuse is getting old, the teacher said. Maybe if you spend half the time you do training studying instead, your grades will be better, he said briefly before continuing. Honestly, you could stand to learn a thing or two from Aristide. Darren's heart dropped at hearing this. It was something he had heard more than once. Someone would always compare him to that particular classmate of his. Every time it made him feel so low. He spent the next few minutes silently sitting there as his teacher continued to lecture him. After what felt like forever, Darren finally left the classroom. As he closed the door, he heard a familiar voice call out to him. Still having trouble with your classwork, Darren? The voice owner asked him tauntingly. Darren turned around, already knowing who it was. The person in question was Aristide Emile, one of Darren's classmates and one of the school's top students. Both boys have been at odds since they were kids, with Aristide winning more often than not, and he was arrogant enough to rub it in Darren's face. None of your business, Darren said, already sounding annoyed by Aristide. He turned to walk away, only for Aristide to already be right in front of him. Unlike Darren, whose superhuman abilities were more about power, Aristide's were about speed. Along with having accelerated healing and lightning-fast reflexes, his powers felt exactly opposite to Darren's. Oh, come now, Darren, Aristide said to him in a mocking voice. We all know you never get any higher than a C on anything. Just all muscle and no brains, aren't you? And you still think you're good enough to become champion? Darren's eyes tensed in anger as Aristide said this. Well, you'll have to grow up and realize the truth soon, Aristide said with a smug grin on his face. Because after graduation, both that title and the sword are all mine. Darren's fist balled up as he glared at Aristide. After a moment, though, he calmed himself, knowing exactly how it would go if he lashed out. Oh, you actually can learn, Aristide said with fake surprise. Not that it matters. Just a little over a month from now, everything will be set in stone. He then walked past Darren with a small chuckle. Darren just let out a sigh before walking the opposite way. The only thing he could think to do was go home. Darren made it home shortly after the confrontation, still feeling as down and angry as before. He walked through the front door to see his parents in the living room. His mom was wiping off the coffee table, while his dad was sitting in his chair reading a book. They both looked over to Darren as he entered. I'm back, Darren said in a low voice. Welcome home, honey, his mom said with a smile. Darren, was all his dad said. before going back to reading, a response his son was very used to. Alice and Roger Stone were just an ordinary couple, at least by the standards of superhumans. They both possessed superhuman strength, but while Roger had enhanced durability, Alice instead had superhuman jumping. All three of these traits were passed down to their son, who at only 15 years old had already greatly surpassed their capabilities. Other than that, the couple both worked ordinary jobs and lived a simple, quiet life. "How was school today?" Mrs. Stone asked her son curiously. "Not good," Darren answered. "I got lectured for failing in class again." Mr. Stone let out a small at hearing this. Another reaction Darren was used to hearing from his father. Mrs. Stone walked up to her son and put a hand on his shoulder. "Oh, honey," she began in a comforting tone. "I know you've been working hard. You'll get it." It's not enough, Mom," Darren said. "I'm not gonna have any chance of being champion if I—" "You're better off not even trying," Mr. Stone spoke up. "That stupid title is a waste." Neither Darren or Mrs. Stone said a word back to him, knowing that he had his own gripe with the champion title and its previous holder. "Anyway, hey Darren," Mrs. Stone started to change the subject. "Dinner will be ready soon. Why don't you go up to your room and I'll call you when it's ready?" "Okay, Mom," Darren said as he started to walk up the stairs. He briefly looked over to his dad, to see a scowl on his face as he read. He just sighed and continued up the stairs. Darren laid down on his bed as what felt like a million thoughts rushed through his head. He thought of his schoolwork and why he forgot so much of it. He thought about Aristide and how irritating he was. He thought about his dad and how much he disapproved of his champion dreams. Finally, he thought of the title itself and what it meant to him. The title of Ravens Point Champion began give or take 500 years ago. The first to receive it was the town's greatest hero. It said that he defeated a terrifying threat that nearly ended the world. His weapon was a sword he made himself, which is said to have granted him the power of the gods. Since his passing, many others have been chosen as champion, with the duty of protecting the town and its people. Though in all that time, none since the first have been able to use the sword's power. The last champion was Darren's grandfather, Roger Stone Sr. Considered the best of his generation, he was awarded the title with little opposition. However, unlike those before him, Roger chose to leave town to follow in the hero's footsteps. Despite protests from those in charge, he left the day he was given the sword, only returning twice. The first was to bring his newly born son to stay in the care of his closest friends, and left the next day, only to return when he was ready to retire. Due to him being gone for most of his life, Roger and his son were greatly estranged. Due to this, they both lived on opposite ends of town, and rarely spoke. Roger Sr. tried to connect with his son, who rejected him every time, not being able to forgive his father for leaving him for most of his life. And so, they stayed separated until Roger Sr.'s death, just 2 years before the present. Darren, however, was very close to his grandpa. He would often go to the old man's house to hear stories of his adventures, stories of fighting bandits, exploring ancient ruins, and finding lost treasures. All excited the young boy's mind. It all made him aspire to follow in his grandfather's footsteps and become the next champion. Unfortunately for Darren, however, he could not live up to the expectations of what those in charge set for the selection. Despite his impressive superhuman abilities, he was not considered smart enough to receive the title. His grades were always below average. He forgets half of what he learned and gets easily overwhelmed by more than one thing at once. He was quickly overlooked in favor of the more intelligent and skilled Aristide. Darren still did not want to give up. Even with all his intellectual faults, he still wanted to prove his worth as the next champion before it was too late. Later that night, Darren was back in his bed falling asleep. Suddenly, he was woken up to the screaming outside his window. He jumped out of bed to look outside to see people fighting in the streets. He knew instantly what was going on. A bandit attack. And that's the end of Chapter 10. Yeah, basically just a brief introduction to Darren, our sixth and final protagonist. A little bit about himself and the struggles he's going through trying to achieve his dreams. Yeah. And the other guy in question, Aristide, is going to be his rival. Bit of a bitter rivalry. And from what I looked up while thinking of his name, it's supposed to be French for the best rival. Yeah, just a little joke there. But yeah, the next chapter, chapter 11, I'll try to do sometime next week. And that'll cover the middle part of Darren's backstory. Anyway, and sorry for fumbling a little bit here and there. But regardless of that, I hope you enjoyed hearing the story, and hope you'll look forward to the next chapter. And now I'm so say, so I'm just going to end the video here. And as always, please let me know your thoughts about this war in the comments. And with that, I'll see you all in the next video. Bye.